Mark Delaney hadn't finished his first sip of morning coffee when he spotted the bright orange slip flapping under his windshield wiper. He blinked twice before setting his cup on the porch rail. At first glance, he thought it might be a flyer for a neighborhood event, another lost cat, maybe, or someone offering seasonal yard work. But as he stepped out across the pebbled walkway in his slippers, he recognized the stiff paper stock and bold sans serif font. His stomach dropped. Sunbend Valley HOA, Notice of Violation. He plucked it from beneath the wiper and held it at arm's length like it might bite. The morning light hadn't fully warmed the October air, and the desert breeze tugged at the hem of his flannel robe. The van sat where it always had, angled carefully up the driveway's slight incline, its silver exterior dulled by sun and time. Nothing about it had changed in years. He scanned the code at the top, B4281. The explanation read, "Vehicle violates community aesthetic policy. Must be removed within 72 hours or face towing and administrative penalty." Below that, the form ended with a line that had clearly once held a human signature, now replaced by a single, sterile stamp, "Compliance Office." Inside, the kitchen smelled like toast and instant coffee. His mother, Helen, sat in her motorized chair at the round table, buttering an English muffin with slow precision. Her radio murmured in the background, tuning between AM talk and a crackling instrumental that might have been Moon River. "They got you, huh?" she said without looking up. Mark laid the slip beside her plate. Apparently the van offends someone's sense of symmetry. "Last time it was wind chimes," she said, dabbing her chin. "Linda's, remember? That was a $75 violation." He grunted. "They said it was audibly disruptive during gusts." Helen clicked her tongue. "Windy chimes. In a place called Sunbend Valley. How dare she?" Mark gave a half-smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. The citation was too specific, too formal. The van wasn't exactly subtle. It was a tall, boxy Ford with a retractable ramp and a faded handicapped placard, but it was legal, registered, and parked squarely on their property. He dialed the number listed at the bottom of the notice. A cheerful recorded voice welcomed him to the Sunbend Valley HOA hotline, promising streamlined service and prompt communication. He pressed 2 for violations, then 4 to speak with a representative. After a series of musical interludes and another dead-end menu, the line went to voicemail. He left his name, property address, and a clipped summary of the issue, then hung up. "Efficient," he said flatly. "You want eggs?" Helen asked. "I'm making scrambled." He shook his head. "I'll head to the HOA office. Maybe someone's in." The drive down Maple Crest Lane was lined with orderly yards, white stones, trimmed hedges, fake geese and sunglasses. A few houses had Halloween decorations already up, a pumpkin with crooked Sharpie eyes, a plastic ghost tethered to a porch rail. At the far end of the block, he slowed beside Lot 17. It was the kind of empty parcel you'd stop noticing after a week, just a square of gravel and desert weeds, rimmed by a sagging split-rail fence. But something new had been added. Near the front corner stood a freshly planted wooden stake, marked with orange tape and a small, official-looking flag. Mark frowned. At the HOA building, a beige prefab near the pool, he parked beside a line of empty golf carts. The glass door was locked. A handwritten sign read, "Drop all correspondence in secure box to the left." The box was metal, bolted to the wall. He peered inside through the tinted window. Desks sat empty. A stack of paper reams was piled on a chair. On the far wall hung a bulletin board, its centerpiece a gold-lettered placard, "Cynthia Blake, President." So that was the name. He remembered vague mentions at the diner a few months back, something about a new board, a close vote. No one had seemed terribly interested at the time. Back home, he found Helen back on the porch with a mug of decaf and a half-finished puzzle book. She looked up as he approached. "Still nobody?" "Locked. Dropbox and silence. Want a muffin?" He sat beside her. The porch swing creaked under his weight. She passed him the buttered half she hadn't eaten. "You know, she said, I never liked that phrase. Community standards. Sounds like something they use when they run out of arguments. Mark took a bite, then exhaled. The mountain ridge in the distance glowed copper in the afternoon light. He could hear someone's sprinkler ticking, the low buzz of a hedge trimmer, a flag flapping gently 2 doors down. His phone buzzed on the armrest. He opened the new message. Subject, violation #B4281, final reminder. Mr. Delaney. Per HOA guidelines, your vehicle must be removed or relocated within 72 hours to maintain community uniformity. Non-compliance will result in enforcement measures. No name. No contact number. Just, compliance office. Helen handed him a refill of coffee. We could repaint it pink, she offered. Or add flowers. That might make it aesthetic. He gave a dry laugh but said nothing. Later, after dinner, he walked along the sidewalk to cool off, past the mailboxes, past the tiny community garden with 3 scraggly tomato plants. When he reached lot 17 again, he slowed. The flag was still there, and now, fresh tire tracks etched the gravel. Not city maintenance. Not random. Something was brewing. When he returned, Helen had already dozed off with a blanket over her knees, radio whispering low. The next morning, while the porch was still bathed in shadow, he poured himself a cup of coffee and sat beside her, neither of them speaking for a while. Across the street, a woman with designer sunglasses and a clipboard snapped a photo of their front yard. Beneath a flickering garage light, Mark flipped to page 47 of the HOA manual, highlighting the clause about non-standard vehicles. The manual smelled like dust and lemon cleaner. He ran a finger down the densely packed paragraph, eyebrows knitting as he reread the same vague sentence for the 3rd time. Vehicles modified for accessibility must comply with visibility and conformity standards as determined by the board. It said a lot and very little all at once. Behind him, the old heater in the corner rattled to life. On the workbench sat Helen's pill organizer, lids open, ready for its weekly refill. He began sorting the capsules automatically, muscle memory from years of doing this every Friday morning. Outside, a plastic skeleton danced in the wind from Joe's porch across the street. Halloween had arrived early in Sunbend Valley. From the hallway, Helen called out, first it was gnomes, now it's vans. Maybe next, they'll outlaw bird feeders. Mark let out a soft snort, not quite laughter. She rolled into the garage with her cardigan bundled around her, balancing a plate with 2 slices of leftover apple pie. He glanced at her over his glasses. It's vague. Vague on purpose, I think. So they can bend it whichever way they want, she asked, passing him a plate. Something like that. A little later, after he'd dressed and scribbled a few notes on a yellow pad, Mark drove back to the HOA building. The office wasn't locked this time, just barely open. The inside smelled like plastic and copier toner. A heater ticked in the background. Jerry, the youngish clerk, looked up from behind the desk and offered a tight, uncertain smile. I'm here about a violation, Mark said, holding out the orange slip from the previous morning. Jerry blinked. Let me see. The man fumbled through a small stack of forms. Mark glanced around. On the bulletin board were event notices, bunco night, knitting circle, and a sign-up for fall beautification volunteers. A flyer on the far wall featured a stock photo of cheerful seniors under the banner Uniformity is Community. I was hoping to speak to someone, Mark added. About the policy. I can see if. Before he could finish, a door behind him opened. Cynthia Blake stepped out, tablet in hand. She wore a tailored blazer in desert beige, her hair precisely styled and shoulder-length. She looked at Jerry, then at Mark. Mr. Delaney, she asked. He nodded. I'm Cynthia Blake. HOA president. I understand you have a concern. I have a citation, he said. Regarding the van. I wanted clarification. She approached with measured steps. It's a straightforward item. Non-standard vehicle. It's in the guidelines. Page 47, if I remember correctly. I've read it, he said. It's ambiguous. Her smile didn't move her eyes. Rules apply equally, Mr. Delaney. He didn't reply. The moment stretched. Jerry shifted behind the desk. Cynthia added, if you believe the citation was issued in error, you're welcome to submit a formal exemption request with supporting documentation. Mark thanked her and left. As he reached the door, he glanced back. Cynthia had already turned away, tapping something into her tablet. He drove to Rosie's Diner. The place hadn't changed in decades, still had the red vinyl booths and a bell that jingled when you entered. The diner owner, Rosie herself, greeted him with a nod and pointed him to the corner window seat. A fresh pot of coffee was already half empty on his table. That was routine. Joe entered a few minutes later and slid into the opposite booth. Heard about the van, he said quietly, eyes scanning the menu he never really read. Mark shrugged. Apparently it disrupts the visual harmony. Joe snorted. Linda got written up for the color of our mailbox. She painted it dove gray. It's always been that color. Now it's apparently 3 shades lighter than the approved palette. Mark raised an eyebrow. There's a palette? Exactly. Linda showed up a few minutes later, joining them with a purse full of receipts and frustration. Bird feeders, she said flatly. They're next. Attracts pests. That's the wording. Pests. Mark stirred his coffee slowly. Glenn Campbell's Wichita Lineman played softly from the jukebox in the corner. Other patrons chatted quietly, forks clinking against plates, the hush of shared grievance hanging under the surface. He left a generous tip on the table and waved to Rosie on his way out. Joe gave him a squeeze on the shoulder before parting. Back home, Helen was in the living room sketching loosely in a notebook. When he walked in, she held up the pad. I was thinking, she said, if they don't want the van there, maybe we use that lot next door. The one with the for sale sign. Mark looked down at her drawing. A modest garden, a few benches, a bird bath. Nothing fancy. Just for fun, she added. He nodded. It's an idea. Later that afternoon, a new envelope arrived, slid neatly into their mailbox. Inside was a typed letter on HOA letterhead. To whom it may concern. In order to assess your vehicle's ADA compliance status, we request the following within 48 hours, photographic evidence of required accessibility features, a written statement of medical necessity, and any existing exemption documentation. Failure to respond will result in further enforcement measures. Sincerely, Cynthia Blake, President, Sunbend Valley HOA. Mark read the letter twice, then set it on the table beside the yellow pad. That night, needing air, he walked the block alone. The moon cast long shadows over porches and sidewalks. Kid skeleton decorations glowed under orange lights, and plastic pumpkins lined walkways. As he passed lot 17, he slowed. Tire tracks curled across the gravel, not his. Closer to the center, faint chalk lines marked off rectangular shapes in neat, measured grids. That night, Mark walked past lot 17 and noticed fresh tire tracks and chalk lines drawn in the gravel. A crooked, for sale by owner, sign dangled from a wire fence post, half buried in sun-baked soil. Mark leaned against the edge of his truck, arms folded, staring at lot 17 as if it might change shape if he waited long enough. The desert weeds were stubborn, coiling at the base of the faded sign like sentinels. The wooden post had warped from years of heat, and one corner of the sign hung lower than the other, a casualty of time and apathy. You know, Helen said from the passenger seat, I've always dreamed of having a little garden next door. He smiled faintly. You and about 10 jackrabbits. They were parked just far enough away not to draw attention, angled discreetly at the corner. Helen sipped from her thermos, the one with faded pink roses on the side, and leaned back in her seat. It was one of those quiet mid-October mornings where the air still held the night's chill, and the town felt paused. Inside the county records office, the air was thick with the scent of old paper and worn carpet. The receptionist, a woman with permed gray hair and a sweatshirt that read, "Spooktacular October," pointed Mark toward the archives with a practiced smile. "Down the hall, room 3A. If it smells like glue, you're in the right place." The community map archive room was dim and lined with rolling cabinets. He pulled one open and found a map of Sunbend Valley's central lots, tracing his finger until he reached Lot 17. There was a red line running through the block that marked HOA designation, but Lot 17 stopped short of it. Curious, he flipped through a ledger of parcel records until he found a notation, "Title dormant. No active HOA claim. Last update, 2009. He double-checked with the clerk before leaving. "Yep," she said, peering at the screen. "That one's still privately held. Was supposed to be part of a second-phase development, but the company folded. We get a tax payment on it once a year. Looks like it's owned by a Mr. Andrew Gessner out of Tucson." Mark wrote the name down slowly. Back home, Helen was seated at the kitchen table, sorting coupons into neat little piles. "Still dreaming of marigolds and bird baths?" he asked. She didn't look up. "Maybe a bench with my name on it." He chuckled softly and returned to his office to search public records. A listing popped up, a private landowner's notice posted on a long-defunct classified site. The number was still attached. He copied it into his notepad and tucked it away. That evening, the neighborhood gathered in Joe and Linda's backyard. They'd set up folding chairs in a semicircle around a portable grill. Paper lanterns swung from shepherd's hooks, and kids darted between legs with plastic pumpkins already half-filled. The table groaned under the weight of dishes, foil-wrapped casseroles, bowls of coleslaw, pies still steaming under lattice crusts. Someone had brought a cooler of root beer bottles, the glass kind that clinked cheerfully when cracked open. Neil Diamond's voice drifted from a Bluetooth speaker near the porch, crooning "Sweet Caroline." Helen was parked beside Linda beneath the string lights, a flannel blanket draped over her knees. Mark moved through the crowd with easy grace, chatting with neighbors, taking in the slow rhythm of shared space. Then Cynthia arrived. She appeared from the back gate with a tray of cookies and a rehearsed smile. Her blazer was immaculate, despite the informal setting, and the cookies were perfectly arranged on a doily-lined tray with a printed HOA logo tented neatly at one corner. "Thought I'd stop by," she announced, as if she'd been invited. Joe gave her a stiff nod, and Linda's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Cynthia made small talk with a few of the more neutral attendees before approaching the grill. "It's always lovely to see community members gathered like this," she said. "We've got such exciting plans ahead." Mark was refilling plastic cups with root beer when she moved to the center of the yard. "I just wanted to mention," she said, lifting her voice a notch, "that Lot 17, the property just beyond Mark's house, will be undergoing beautification shortly." The group quieted slightly. "We're converting it into a multi-use HOA storage and observation center," she continued. "It will really help maintain the safety and uniformity of Sunbend Valley." Mark kept his face still. Ashley Blake stood beside the grill, her expression unreadable. This was the first time Mark had really taken her in, early 30s, tidy ponytail, HOA polo shirt, but her eyes flicked toward him with something that wasn't quite challenge. "Not yet." Later, as the crowd thinned, she approached him near the cooler. "You're Mark Delaney, right?" "That's right. I work part-time with the HOA. Mostly communications." He nodded. "I figured. You handled the bulletin?" Her lips tightened slightly. "Sometimes I write the copy. Not always the ideas." They stood in silence for a beat, the music behind them shifting into a slower tune. Then she added, "Your mom taught Sunday school at St. Luke's. I still remember the song she made us learn, about Noah and the giraffes." Mark smiled. "She still hums that one." Ashley gave a short nod, then turned back toward the grill. That night, the house was quiet except for the soft shuffle of Helen's slippered feet in the kitchen and the tick of the grandfather clock by the hall. Mark sat in his office, staring at the notepad with the Tucson number. He reached for the phone, hesitated, then dialed. The line rang 4 times before a voice answered, gravelly, older, cautious. "You called about the lot? I'm ready to make a deal if you're still interested." Mark signed the deed with steady hands and a quiet grin. Lot 17 now belonged to Helen Delaney. The pen left a faint indentation beneath the signature, as though the moment needed a little more permanence than ink alone could offer. The notary stamped the final page with a dull, satisfying thunk. It echoed in the quiet of the county deed office, where faded posters about property tax exemptions hung askew and the HVAC vents groaned like someone clearing their throat. He slid the papers into a manila envelope, tucking it into the interior pocket of his jacket. Outside, the sun was already dipping behind the low rise of the hills, casting Sunbend Valley in long amber shadows. It was the kind of late October afternoon where time felt sticky and everything smelled faintly of sun-warmed dust and dry grass. Helen's words from the night before replayed in his mind, "If we ever own that lot, I want one bench with my name carved in it." She'd said it with a smirk, but Mark had taken note. Back home, his garage had transformed into something more purposeful. The blueprints for Helen's old wheelchair-accessible garden trellis had been pulled from storage, and now lay pinned beneath a level and 2 small buckets of finishing nails. On the pegboard, his measuring tape hung next to a string line and a half-used roll of neon flagging tape. Mark opened a box labeled Tools, Keep, and retrieved a worn tape measure, its case scuffed from years of use. He paused, then added it to the bench beside the plans. At the hardware store near the old feed barn, the bell over the door gave a tired jingle as he stepped inside. The place smelled of cedar mulch, WD-40, and lemon oil. A display of seasonal garden flags flapped gently in the breeze from an oscillating fan. Mark moved through the aisles deliberately, selecting cedar posts, straight and uncracked, bags of gravel, edging stones, and a pair of shovels. He didn't ask for help, but when he got to the register, the clerk gave him a curious glance. "Starting something?" she asked. "Just getting things in order." She rang up the items without pushing further, and when Mark wheeled the cart outside, he found Joe waiting by his truck. "Thought that was your truck," Joe said. "Linda saw you out at the deed office earlier. She was walking her sister's poodle." Mark gave a half-shrug. "Was time." Joe didn't ask more. Just grabbed the other end of the cedar posts and helped hoist them into the truck bed. That evening, Mark placed an online order for a wooden sign, rustic carved lettering, stained walnut. It would read, "Helen's Garden, in progress." No flourish. No HOA logos. Just intent. The next morning, the HOA bulletin arrived via email. Sunbend Valley HOA, Community Newsflash. Upcoming beautification project on Lot 17. The HOA is currently preparing to annex Lot 17 for shared community use. Project will include resource storage, observation point, and landscaping compliant with Sunbend standards. Mark read the message twice, then filed it quietly in a folder titled Future. He waited until just after sundown to begin marking the edges of the lot. The air was cooler now, the sky bruising to violet behind the houses. He brought a flashlight with red lens tape, more for subtlety than need, and drove in 3 wooden stakes along the boundary line. He moved slowly, stepping over the dry tufts of brittle grass, his boots collecting the fine cling of desert dust. The smell of fresh cedar clung to his gloves. When he straightened and took a step back, he felt the faintest shift in the air behind him. A car passing. Joe's pickup rolled slowly down the road. He didn't stop. Just honked once and gave a nod. Mark exhaled through his nose and returned to the truck. He would plant the sign in the morning. Helen was already up when he came outside, porch radio playing Blue Skies, her cardigan tucked over one shoulder. "Did you do it?" she asked. He just smiled and held up the post with the wrapped wooden plaque. By 8:30 a.m., Helen's Garden, in progress, stood firm at the corner of Lot 17. The sun hit it at an angle that made the grain of the wood glow. Helen watched from the porch with her coffee, nodding in approval. An hour later, a silver SUV turned the corner. Cynthia's vehicle slowed as it passed. Mark didn't wave. She braked hard, her mouth a tight line behind the windshield. By noon, an envelope appeared taped to their mailbox. Notice, unauthorized private signage, under review. Cynthia's voice was syrupy as she stood on Mark's porch, but her eyes narrowed at the garden stakes. The morning was crisp, with just enough chill in the air to make the steam from Mark's coffee noticeable. The Helen's Garden sign stood proudly in the distance, its stained wood gleaming faintly in the rising light. From the porch swing, Mark had a full view of Lot 17 and the tidy border he'd laid down the night before with fresh mulch and gravel. The edges were even, not a stone out of place. Cynthia's heels clicked on the front walkway with the assertiveness of someone who believed posture counted for more than facts. Her clipboard rested neatly against her hip, a folded paper protruding from the top. She wore a soft peach blazer and a practiced smile. "Mr. Delaney," she began, "we need to discuss your recent landscaping." Mark sipped his coffee and said nothing. "You've installed signage without HOA approval," she continued, gesturing toward the lot. "Per Guideline 9.1, all property-facing public markers must be reviewed for compliance." "It's not on HOA property," he said. "The deed is filed under Helen Delaney." Cynthia's jaw tightened slightly. "Regardless, prominent signage visible from the street affects aesthetic continuity." Helen rolled out the screen door behind him, a tray balanced on her lap. "Care for a cinnamon roll, Cynthia?" she asked sweetly. "Real sugar, no substitutes." Cynthia blinked. "No, thank you. I'm watching my intake." "Aren't we all?" Helen murmured, retreating back inside. Mark produced a plastic folder from beneath his chair and handed it over. "Here's a copy of the deed, dated and notarized. It's private property. You're welcome to review it, but I'd appreciate fewer notices taped to my mailbox in the meantime." Cynthia didn't take the folder. "The board may still decide this creates a visual disruption." Mark met her gaze. "So do wind chimes. And mailbox shades. And bird feeders. But we seem to find ways to live with those." She didn't respond immediately. The silence thickened. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower started up, and a crow let out a single rasping call. "I'll notify you of our decision," she said eventually, turning on her heel. At the next HOA meeting, held in the rec center with chairs arranged in stiff rows, the usual group of retirees murmured in anticipation. A folding table with a single tray of oatmeal cookies sat at the back. Cynthia stepped up to the podium with her usual poise. "This month, the board is proud to propose a pilot program," she announced. "We will be installing small compliance centers, camera-equipped kiosks, to help ensure fair and uniform enforcement." There were a few scattered claps. A woman in the back adjusted her hearing aid. Mark raised his hand. "Will homeowners be notified before surveillance equipment is installed near their homes?" Cynthia kept her tone calm. "The board will consider all appropriate locations." "That's not what I asked." The HOA vice president, an older man with a tie clip shaped like a golf club, shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should table this for further discussion." Mark nodded and returned to his seat. Ashley, seated near the side wall with a legal pad in her lap, caught his eye but said nothing. Later that day, Mark stopped in at Rosie's diner. The window seat was open, and Rosie herself had already set out a mug and the sugar shaker. The place smelled like fried potatoes and maple syrup, and Glenn Campbell's voice crooned low from the jukebox. Linda slid into the booth a few minutes later and handed him a small folded note. He opened it quietly. "We're with you. Call if needed." She gave a small nod and left without ordering. Back at home, Helen had filled the kitchen with the scent of cinnamon and butter. Loaves of fresh bread cooled on the wire rack, their tops golden and cracked. Joe dropped by under the pretense of returning a hammer. He stayed 2 hours. They talked about nothing in particular: sports scores, a good beef stew recipe, a new brand of slippers he was convinced were worth every penny. Mark poured lemonade, and Helen insisted Joe take home a loaf. He didn't argue. By Saturday afternoon, the signs of change had grown quiet but certain. A couple from 2 streets over waved as they walked by. A neighbor Mark barely knew left a bag of heirloom tomatoes on their porch. So he set up 3 folding chairs under the mulberry tree on lot 17 and wrote a note in neat block letters, "Lemonade and pie, today at 4. Bring your stories." By the time the sun dipped low enough to cast long shadows, 15 people had gathered on the lot, some with lawn chairs, others with folding stools or walkers. There were slices of pumpkin pie on paper plates, lemonade in mismatched cups, and a tub of ice melting slowly in the corner. Helen passed out cookies. Mark poured drinks. Someone brought a battery-powered radio and turned it to a station playing Buddy Holly. People laughed, talked, shared HOA horror stories with more amusement than bitterness. As the gathering dwindled and chairs were folded up, Ashley lingered near the bench Mark had placed near the path. She didn't smile. Just looked at him and said, quietly, "You should really see what's in the HOA storage room." Behind dusty HOA binders and fake potpourri, Ashley found a green notebook with her mother's initials embossed in gold. The scent in the office was stale, a blend of paper, air freshener, and something faintly medicinal. It was after hours, and the hallway lights had already dimmed to their motion saver mode. Ashley stood quietly in the small records room of the HOA office, the door left ajar just wide enough to let in a sliver of hallway light. Her fingertips brushed the spines of binders labeled Compliance 2020, Landscape Logs, Paint Code Index. Behind one, she found it, a green leather-bound ledger with gilded edges and the initials CB engraved at the corner. She hesitated, then opened it. Each page was written in her mother's crisp handwriting, itemized reimbursements, check numbers, vendors with the same last name, repeat charges for identical beautification tasks. Several invoices were marked expedited with generous round dollar amounts. Her stomach tightened. It wasn't just messy bookkeeping. It was too clean. Too curated. She didn't have long. She snapped a few quick photos with her phone, flipped through the last few entries, then carefully returned the ledger to its hiding place behind a seasonal wreath bin labeled Holiday 2018. Outside, the wind whistled between the cars in the parking lot. Halloween decorations still clung to some dashboards, glow-in-the-dark skulls, plastic spiders. Ashley sat in her car for several minutes before dialing. Mark answered on the second ring. "Delaney. I need to talk," she said. "Soon." The next evening, Mark met her near lot 17. She walked along the edge of the gravel, hands tucked into the sleeves of her fleece. Helen was nearby, watching from the porch with a blanket over her lap, mug in hand. "Boundary lines?" he asked lightly. Ashley gave a short nod. "That's my excuse." She handed over her phone. Mark scrolled through the photos slowly. "Beautification projects," he murmured. $6,000 for fall wreaths on common areas. $2,000 for pressure washing mailboxes. Done by Blake Property Services. Ashley stared at the horizon. "That's my uncle. He lives in Colorado. Doesn't own a pressure washer." Mark exhaled. "You sure about this?" "She's my mother," Ashley said. "But she's also the HOA president. And those are 2 separate jobs." Helen rolled closer. She didn't say anything at first, just handed Ashley a paper napkin with a warm slice of cinnamon loaf on it. "You're not her," Helen said softly. "You're better." Ashley blinked, then took a bite. Inside the garage that night, Mark spread out the images on his workbench, printing them 2 per page. He made a list on yellow legal paper, entries with duplicate dates, payments over $1,000 with no matching memo, reimbursements with no receipts. He began drafting a formal audit request. By morning, Helen was sorting coupons in the kitchen by expiration date. "Raisin Brands buy one get one," she noted. Mark sipped his coffee, glancing at the list of neighbors he planned to approach. He wasn't sure how many would sign, but he had to try. At Rosie's Diner, he took the corner booth. Joe arrived first, then Raj. Linda slid in last, setting a reusable canvas tote beside her. Mark passed around copies of the request. No one said much. Joe read in silence, then nodded and signed. Raj followed. Linda asked, "You sure this is how you want to spend your fall?" Mark replied, "No. But someone has to." She signed without another word. Later that afternoon, Ashley returned with formatted documents, HOA headers in place, cover letter professionally neutral. "Mr. Delaney," she said with a dry smile, "attached you'll find your formal audit petition, certified and compliant with Article 7.2 of the Sunbend HOA Charter." He chuckled. "Well done." Helen raised an eyebrow from the porch. "Told you we needed a lawyer." That evening, as the last lights slipped behind the hills, Mark walked to the post office and sent the petition via certified mail. The final count, 16 homeowner signatures, each neatly typed below their address. Back in the HOA office, Jerry stood awkwardly beside the printer as Cynthia opened the envelope. She read the first few lines in silence, her jaw twitching. Then, without a word, she crumpled the cover page in her hand. "Call a special board meeting," she said to Jerry, her voice low and sharp. "Immediately." Cynthia stood at the podium, backlit by a hand-painted banner that read, "Sunbend Fall Festival, honoring community, enforcing excellence." The fabric rippled gently behind her, strung between two poles decorated with dried corn stalks and red maple leaves. The stage itself was a simple wooden platform borrowed from the community rec center. Below it, rows of folding chairs filled quickly as neighbors found spots beside chili booths and pie stands. The scent of cinnamon, slow-cooked meat, and wood chips hung in the air, thick and comforting. Helen sat near the front in her wheelchair, a plaid blanket tucked around her legs and a thermos of hot cider resting on her lap. Mark stood a few steps behind her, arms folded, watching Cynthia's movements with a quiet steadiness. Earlier that morning, as Mark adjusted Helen's scarf before they left the house, she'd smiled up at him and said, "If you speak from the heart, people will hear you, even if there's a microphone in your way." Cynthia's voice cut through the gentle murmur of the crowd. "Neighbors, friends, thank you for joining us at this year's Fall Festival," she began. "It's a joy to see Sunbend Valley thriving. With your support, we continue our mission, a harmonious, unified, and beautiful place to call home." Mark spotted Ashley off to the side near the AV table, laptop open, headset dangling loosely around her neck. She didn't look at Cynthia. Together, Cynthia continued, "We're unveiling the next phase of community stewardship, our compliance centers. These quiet observation posts will help ensure safety and uphold the very standards that keep Sunbend the gem of the valley." Mark stepped forward. "Madam President," he said, voice firm but calm, "I'd like to request a few minutes under the open comments provision." Cynthia's expression faltered just slightly. "This isn't the time for." "It's listed in the program," Mark replied, holding up a printed copy. "Page 2. She hesitated, then gestured stiffly toward the microphone. Ashley gave him a small nod from behind her laptop. The projector hummed to life, displaying a spreadsheet on the side wall of the stage. Mark began, "These are financial disbursements from the HOA's beautification and maintenance budget over the last 12 months. Many of you have received fines, some for bird feeders, some for mailbox shades. We were told these funds went toward community improvements." He clicked to the next slide. "This shows over $25,000 in payments to a landscaping company run by Cynthia Blake's brother-in-law. No licenses. No itemized services." A low murmur spread through the crowd. Next slide, duplicate reimbursements for the same event. A fall entryway beautification paid out twice in 2 weeks to the same person. No receipts. No approvals logged. Mr. Harris, the HOA treasurer, stood slowly near the front. "I never authorized those reimbursements," he said. "They weren't on the statements I reviewed." Gasps scattered across the lawn. Someone whispered, "I paid that fine in April." "Where'd it go?" Cynthia moved back toward the microphone, face tight. "These are misunderstandings," she said quickly. "Clerical errors, easily explainable." Helen wheeled herself forward. Mark stepped aside to let her pass. She stopped beside the ramp leading up to the stage. She didn't ask for the mic. Her voice was strong enough. "It's not just about rules," she said, her eyes sweeping the crowd. "It's about how those rules are used. And misused. It's about who gets to decide what counts as uniform, and who gets punished for stepping outside a line no one knew was drawn." Applause started in the back and rolled forward like thunder. Chairs scraped against the grass as more people stood, clapping. Helen bowed her head once and turned her chair back toward Mark. Cynthia stood frozen, eyes scanning the crowd. Then, without a word, she stormed off the stage, heels snapping against the wood. As the noise quieted, a tall man in a brown corduroy jacket approached Mark. He held out a city ID badge. "I'm with the mayor's office," he said, lowering his voice. "We'll be in touch. Misuse of HOA funds is a serious matter." The new sign read, "Helen's Garden, all are welcome." Beneath it, a row of marigolds danced in the early light. The petals glowed gold in the sun, swaying gently in the morning breeze. Gravel paths traced soft arcs through raised flowerbeds, and a newly planted sapling cast a dapple of promise over the carved bench placed near its base. The lettering on the bench was simple, elegant, in honor of Helen Delaney. For laughter, for kindness, for staying. Mark adjusted the signpost slightly, brushing off a smudge of soil from its base. Behind him, Helen sat in her wheelchair, bundled in her favorite cardigan, a silk scarf knotted at her throat. "Looks like we finally found the right spot for that rosemary," she said, pointing to the green sprig nestled beside the marigolds. "For remembrance." Mark smiled. "And the view's not bad either. Someday, you'll have the view you deserve." He'd said that to her a year ago when she'd had to give up her backyard roses for a paved ramp. It came back to him now, clearer than ever. That afternoon, neighbors began arriving with covered dishes and folding chairs. Joe brought a crock-pot of chili. Linda carried a tray of deviled eggs and a still-warm apple pie. Raj came with samosas, wrapped neatly in foil. Children raced down the walkways, paper cups of root beer floats spilling foam across their hands. Someone had tied blue ribbons to the back of the benches. Ashley clipped laminated signs along the path: lettuce bed, birdwatching corner, quiet spot for reading. At 4 o'clock, Mr. Harris stepped up to the small wooden platform near the center shade tree. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow, tie slightly loosened, clipboard tucked under one arm. "I'd like to thank you all," he began, clearing his throat, "for showing up, not just today, but over the past few weeks. Change isn't easy. And neither is admitting when something's been misused." There were quiet murmurs of agreement. He turned to Mark. "Thanks to Mr. Delaney's leadership, we've begun revising HOA policy with full homeowner access. No more secret fines, no more buried decisions." He paused. "We also owe something more personal to Helen Delaney, whose vision turned a vacant lot into a space that welcomes everyone." Applause rippled through the crowd. Helen raised a hand modestly, chuckling under her breath. "Tell them they can't clap until the tree survives the summer." Ashley moved beside Mark after the speech. She held a manila folder full of handouts. "First transparency packet goes out next week," she said. "And I've started drafting a community bulletin board for the park entrance, calendar, events, open board topics." Mark nodded. "You're staying?" She looked at him, smile a little weary but genuine. "Sunben's still home. I'd rather fix it than run." He looked past her toward the street, where a moving truck sat idling in front of Cynthia's old house. No ceremony, no goodbye. Just an SUV with tinted windows, boxes labeled in careful black marker, and a gardener pulling up the last of the potted topiaries. By sundown, the potluck had mellowed into gentle conversation. Porch swings creaked in the soft breeze. Old lawn chairs leaned back. Helen's radio played Nat King Cole's "Unforgettable" from the porch, its warm crackle cutting through the hum of crickets. Mark brought her a thermos of chamomile tea. "It's cooler than I thought it'd be," she said, wrapping her hands around the cup. "November's here," he replied, sitting beside her on the swing. "Time for sweaters and quiet." They sat like that for a while, watching the last of the children chase each other between the garden beds. A flashlight beam flickered behind a bush. Laughter echoed. Somewhere, someone popped the last of the lemonade ice cubes into their drink. Mark leaned in close. "No more warning slips," he whispered to Helen. In the stillness of early evening, the laughter of children echoed through Helen's garden, and the carved bench beneath the shade tree stood as quiet proof that change, once resisted, had bloomed. What began with a single citation ended in unity, where neighbors found not only their voices but also their strength. When rules are used for power, they divide, but when reclaimed by the people, they can help a community grow whole again. Perhaps the real victory wasn't in removing one leader, but in reminding everyone that kindness, truth, and quiet defiance can plant the seeds of something lasting. Like marigolds blooming from hard, dry soil, justice has a way of finding its place, when we care enough to tend it.